The laughter reached me before I even sat down. At least one of my children knew how not to waste potential, my father said, his voice carrying easily across the private dining room. He wrapped an arm around my sister's shoulders and pulled her close. Glasses chimed. Someone applauded. A phone camera flashed. I slid into my chair a second later, unnoticed, my hands folding neatly in my lap. That sentence landed the way it always did, light on the surface, sharp underneath. No one said my name, but everyone knew who the other child was. I felt heat creep up my neck, a familiar reaction I'd learned not to show. I kept my eyes on the polished table, the reflections of crystal and candlelight blurring together. This was my father's birthday dinner, a private room, family only, and somehow, even here, I was still the unspoken agreement. My name is Lydia Morrison, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet one in a family that measures love by recognition. I'm in my late 30s now, but in my parents' minds, I stopped progressing years ago, the moment I chose a path they didn't understand. In our house, success was never about fulfillment. It was about visibility, titles, invitations. Who knew your name without explanation? My father, James Morrison, built his life on that belief. Long hours, carefully chosen words, the kind of man who thought achievement didn't exist unless it could be announced in a crowded room. My mother, Margaret, learned to survive alongside him by mastering pleasant silence, soft smiles, gentle redirections, never challenging him directly. And then there was Emma, my younger sister, the one who followed the blueprint perfectly. Law school, promotions, prestigious firms. She moved through life like she'd memorized the answers before the questions were asked. My parents loved her the way people love proof, openly, proudly, without restraint. Growing up, the comparisons were rarely cruel, just constant. Emma's accomplishments earned framed photos and celebratory dinners. Mine earned polite nods and quick subject changes. When I chose engineering instead of law, my father didn't argue. He simply went quiet, as if I'd stepped off a road he trusted and wandered into uncertainty. When I started working in technology, my mother told relatives I was exploring options. I learned quickly what that meant. So I adjusted. I became smaller, quieter. I sat at the far end of tables. I finished meals without drawing attention. I let conversations happen around me instead of including me. It wasn't that I lacked ambition, I just stopped offering it to people who'd already decided it didn't count. This dinner was supposed to be different, a milestone birthday, a chance for everyone to gather and pretend we were closer than we really were. The room smelled like expensive wine and polished wood. Soft music played beneath overlapping conversations. Emma arrived first, greeted with warm hugs and eager questions before she'd even removed her coat. I arrived minutes later and slipped into my seat while no one was looking. As the evening unfolded, stories about my father's career filled the air. Compliments passed easily between relatives. My mother adjusted the candles on the cake with careful precision. Emma laughed effortlessly, confident and relaxed. I watched it all with the dull awareness that comes from repetition. I knew what came next. After the appetizers were cleared, the tone shifted, subtle but unmistakable. That was when the comparisons began, disguised as admiration. Someone brought up Emma's recent promotion. Another relative mentioned a major case she'd worked on. My father leaned back, nodding along, each word reinforcing something he already believed. And she handled it beautifully, my aunt said, just like her father. Emma smiled modestly, practiced in the art of appearing humble. For a brief second, her eyes flicked toward me, then away. The conversation drifted, slowly and inevitably, in my direction. "So, Lydia," my uncle asked, swirling his drink, "you're still in computers, right?" "I work in technology," I replied evenly. "Oh," he chuckled, "very modern." My father waved a dismissive hand without looking at me. "She prefers working independently. Not everyone's suited for traditional careers." There it was. Independent. The word he used when he didn't want to say unsuccessful. Another relative asked if I was still renting that small office downtown. Someone else wondered aloud whether I'd ever thought about changing direction before it was too late. My mother stepped in, trying to soften the edges. "Lydia's very creative. She's always done things her own way." I heard the apology beneath her words. I took a sip of water and watched condensation slide down the glass. I didn't correct anyone. I'd learned long ago that explanations only made things worse. In this family, success only mattered if it looked familiar. As the praise for Emma grew louder, memories I'd buried began pushing forward. The partnership that dissolved after a quiet conversation with my father. The investor who suddenly stopped returning calls. The opportunity that vanished after Emma casually described my work as experimental. At the time, I'd blamed timing, inexperience, bad luck. Sitting there now, listening to my father talk about legacy and reputation, I realized it hadn't been coincidence. It had been protection, just not for me. They were protecting the image, and anything that didn't fit it had quietly been pushed aside. The room felt smaller by the minute. Laughter sounded sharper. My name came up again, this time with a sigh. "You had every advantage," my father said at last, finally turning toward me. "Great education, support, and yet—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Something shifted inside me then. Not anger, not sadness, but a cold, steady clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop hoping. For the first time that night, I met his gaze. He leaned forward, his tone casual, as if he were doing me a favor by asking. "So tell me," he said, "what do you think went wrong with you?" The question settled over the table, heavy and unmistakable. For a moment, everything else faded. The music, the clinking glasses, even my own breath. All I could hear was the echo of every time I'd tried to explain myself and failed. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because suddenly I understood something I'd missed for years. I'd been answering the wrong question my entire life. It wasn't what went wrong with me. It was why I was still asking them to understand. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it on the table. My hands were steady, surprisingly so. My father mistook my silence for surrender. I could see it in the way he leaned back, satisfied. But the conversation wasn't over. It had only just begun. The quiet after my father's question stretched longer than anyone expected. "What do you think went wrong with you?" No one rushed to fill the silence. No nervous laughter. No polite interruption. Even the soft music humming through the room felt distant, like it had been turned down without anyone noticing. I could feel every eye settle on me, some curious, some uncomfortable, some already assuming how this would end. My mother shifted in her chair first. "James," she said gently, the way she always did when she wanted calm without conflict. "This isn't the moment." "It's the perfect moment," my father replied, still watching me. "She deserves honesty." Honesty. The word nearly made me smile. I looked around the table. My aunt stared at the rim of her glass. My uncle suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. Emma sat perfectly still, her expression neutral, her hands folded as if this had nothing to do with her. She didn't defend me, she never had. For years, I'd imagined this moment differently. I'd rehearsed explanations during long drives and sleepless nights. I'd practiced saying the right things in the right order, hoping one day they'd finally understand. But sitting there now, I realized something unsettling. No answer I gave would ever be enough. I could tell them about the nights I slept on the office couch, about the weekends I spent rebuilding systems while others went on vacations. I could describe the risks I took, the fear I carried quietly, the way I kept going without applause. But I knew how it would sound to him. "Excuses." My mother glanced at me, worry etched into her face. Emma's jaw tightened slightly, though she still refused to look directly at me. Something inside me softened, and then went still. The part of me that wanted approval, that still hoped for validation, finally went quiet. In its place came a calm I hadn't felt before. Clear, grounded. I wasn't angry. I was done. I set my napkin down carefully and rested my hands on the table. My father misread the gesture as submission. He leaned back slightly, already preparing to move the conversation along. But instead of shrinking, I stood. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor cut through the room, sharp and unmistakable. It wasn't loud, but it commanded attention in a way raised voices never could. My father paused mid-motion, his glass hovering in the air. "Lydia," he said, smiling tightly, "sit down. We're about to make a toast." "I won't be long," I replied calmly. My mother inhaled sharply. "Lydia, please, this is your father's birthday." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm saying this now." Emma finally looked at me, really looked at me. The polished confidence she carried so easily all evening cracked just slightly. Something like uncertainty flickered across her face. My father tilted his head. "Go on." I glanced around the table, taking in the familiar faces, people who had watched me grow smaller year after year and called it realism. People who laughed at comments made at my expense and labeled it honesty. You asked what went wrong with me, I said evenly. I think it's only fair you hear the answer. He let out a small, dismissive laugh. This isn't the place. I disagree. The room fell completely silent. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. No hesitation, no dramatic pause, just one smooth movement. I unlocked the screen and turned it toward the center of the table. I never talked about my work because none of you wanted to hear it, I continued. But since disappointment is the topic tonight, let's talk about facts. The screen glowed softly beneath the chandelier. Numbers. Clean, simple, unmistakable. Someone drew in a sharp breath. My aunt leaned forward, squinting. Is that? My father's smile froze. That's not real. I slid the phone closer so everyone could see. That's one account, I said. Personal. The silence shifted. It wasn't polite anymore. It was heavy, pressing against everyone at the table. Emma's face drained of color. Lydia? She whispered. What is this? This, I said calmly, is what happens when you stop trying to impress people who already decided who you are. My father laughed again, but the sound was brittle. You expect us to believe you're sitting on that kind of money? I don't expect belief, I replied. I expect recognition. I tapped the screen again, opening a brief valuation summary. Clear, minimal, impossible to misunderstand. My company operates in artificial intelligence, I said. Infrastructure systems, finance, healthcare, logistics, quiet industries, the kind that don't show up in casual conversation. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Lydia. That valuation, I continued, is conservative. A fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered against a plate. Emma had already pulled out her phone, scrolling rapidly. This company, she said slowly. These articles, they're about you. I nodded. The table erupted into overlapping voices. How long has this been going on? Why didn't you say anything? This can't be real. My father slammed his hand against the table. Enough! The room stilled again. If you've done well, he said sharply. Fine, congratulations. But doing this here on my birthday, that's humiliating. I tilted my head slightly. Humiliating? He gestured around the room. You let us think. Think what? I interrupted, my voice still steady. That I was failing? That I was lost? You never asked, I continued. You assumed. My mother reached for my arm. You should have told us. We could have helped. Introduced you to the right people. I gently pulled my arm back. You did help, I said quietly. Just not in the way you think. The words settled heavily. I didn't build what I built because of this family, I went on. I built it despite being dismissed, despite being quietly undermined, despite being told over and over that what I did wasn't real. My father stared at me now, something unfamiliar flickering behind his eyes. Uncertainty. Fear. You wanted legacy, I said. You wanted the Morrison name to mean something. I met his gaze without flinching. It does. The room held its breath. And you're about to understand how. For a moment, no one spoke. My words hovered in the air, heavy and undeniable. The room that had always bent itself around my father's presence now felt unbalanced, as if something fundamental had shifted and no one knew how to correct it. He was the first to move. You think this proves something? He asked, his voice lower now, careful. Money doesn't erase choices. It doesn't excuse disrespect. I studied him quietly. For the first time, I wasn't searching his face for approval or reaction. I was simply observing. This isn't about money, I said. It never was. He scoffed, but the sound lacked confidence. Then what is this? A performance? No, I replied. It's an ending. My mother pressed her lips together, her eyes glossy. Lydia, please. You're hurt. We can talk about this later, privately. We've had later my entire life, I said gently. Later never came. Emma stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. You should have told me, she said, her voice tight. I didn't know any of this. I turned to her. For years, I'd wondered what it would feel like to finally be seen by my sister. What I felt now surprised me. Nothing. You didn't ask, I said simply. And you benefited from not asking. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked genuinely shaken, as if a familiar structure she'd leaned on had cracked beneath her. My father rubbed his temple, his earlier authority slipping. If this is true, he said, then we should discuss how to move forward. There are opportunities here, connections, influence. There it was. Even now he couldn't help himself. I'm not here to negotiate, I said. I'm here to close a chapter. I picked up my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The proof no longer mattered. It had already done its work. You spent years telling people I wasn't ready, I continued. That I was a risk. You protected the family image by quietly closing doors in front of me. My mother's breath caught. We were just trying to help. Help looks different from control, I said. The truth landed harder than anger ever could. You wanted a version of me you could explain at dinner parties, I went on. When I didn't become that, you treated me like a problem to manage. My father stared at the table now, his reflection warped in the polished surface. You could have come to us. I did, I said, just not in a way you respected. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was resigned. I reached for my coat and folded it over my arm. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt steady, complete. Happy birthday, I said, looking directly at my father. This is the only gift I had left to give you. He swallowed. And what is that? The truth. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Emma spoke again, her voice unsteady. Wait, we should talk about this. Just us. There could be possibilities. I paused, then looked back at her. Possibilities only matter when respect comes first, I said. Not after. My father sank back into his chair, smaller somehow. The room no longer revolved around him. Conversations hadn't resumed. No one reached for their glasses. I walked out of the private dining room without another word, leaving behind half-filled drinks, an untouched cake, and a family forced to sit with what they had never prepared for. The hallway outside felt cooler, quieter, like stepping out of a storm into clean air. I didn't rush, I didn't look back. My driver stood by the curb, opening the door as I approached. City lights reflected across the windshield as I slid into the back seat, my coat still neatly folded in my hands. Home? He asked. I considered it for a moment. No, I said, the office. The car pulled away from the restaurant, the glow of the building fading into the distance. My phone vibrated once, then again, then again. Messages stacked across the screen. My mother asking to talk. Emma saying she hadn't known. Relatives suddenly eager to reconnect. I turned the screen face down. The elevator ride to the top floors was quiet and familiar. When the doors opened, the soft hum of systems greeted me, steady, purposeful. Screens glowed gently in the dim light. This space didn't demand explanation. It didn't question my worth. It trusted it. I set my phone on the desk and exhaled slowly. For years, I thought success meant finally earning my family's approval. That if I worked hard enough, proved myself thoroughly enough, they would see me differently. That night taught me something else. Success isn't convincing people who underestimated you to change their minds. It's knowing who you are, even when they never do. I looked out over the city, lights stretching endlessly in every direction, and felt something settle deep in my chest. I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away whole. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or quietly diminished by the people closest to you, know this: you don't owe anyone proof of your worth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop asking to be seen.